Several Canadian municipalities are actively pushing motions to lower the municipal voting age to 16 as part of a broader Vote 16 Canada initiative. In Toronto, Councillor Diane Sachs tabled a motion directing staff to report on reducing the voting age in local polls by Q1 2025, joining 14 other municipalities, including Edmonton, Calgary, Saanich, and Whitehorse, that have all already passed similar resolutions. Grassroots campaigns in cities like Brampton and Burnaby, backed by local youth advocates, are urging councillors to endorse Vote 16 local and press provincial governments to allow such changes. Joining me now in studio for more on this is our correspondent, Wyatt Sharpe. Wyatt, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you.
I want to start with what are the strongest arguments for and against lowering the voting age to 16, and how do they hold up under scrutiny?
Yeah, and that's certainly one valid, question that is getting asked because as these, pieces of legislation are being introduced in various legislatures, whether it be provincial or municipal, as you had mentioned, the number one criticism is oftentimes young people's brains are not fully developed. They don't have the kind of cognitive abilities to go about these types of tasks and ultimately decide the future of not only Canada, but also just really society in general. Of course, a government doesn't just affect the 4 years that they are in office for, but really for decades after that as well. But I think a lot of the counter arguments that you're seeing to that is just, kind of a general argument that by introducing, the younger voting age of 16, so that people can actually become civically engaged at a kind of earlier stage in their life, it's going to make it so they're more likely to continue those patterns later on in their life as well. Of course, people when they're 18 years old, that's a much busier time in your life for most people anyways than when you're 16. When you're 18, you're starting university, you're in many cases getting your first jobs, you're having to worry about a bunch of different, financial and fiscal concerns that you didn't have to worry about before. And so it's safe to say, I think, in a number of respects, that voting really isn't a top priority for people when they're 18. Whereas if you introduce it when, you're 16 years old, you're more likely again to continue some of those patterns and those habits later on. And I think also one of the main arguments, again, going kind of against what people are saying, that young people don't have the cognitive abilities to go out and vote because their brains are not fully developed, kind of relates to this point of, a lack of interest in politics and the fact that people oftentimes don't pay attention. Maybe they're misinformed. That's certainly a valid argument. Young people in many cases are vulnerable to misinformation. If they see it on social media, they'll take something that may be opinionated or perhaps exaggerated and shared through various algorithms for clickbait reasons or what have you. But I would argue that it really isn't just young people who are susceptible to that. It really comes down to society more broadly speaking. We've seen record low numbers of civic engagement amongst society as a whole, which suggests that kind of the status quo and the current system is not working. So perhaps it is time to make a change and introduce the voting age at the age of 16.
And how might introducing the voting age at the age of 16 affect the political landscape? Will one party benefit more if people at the age of 16 are able to vote?
It really depends when you ask that question, because I think if you were to ask me that question a few years ago, it was generally the stereotype that young people tended to lean more progressive, perhaps more liberal, NDP, Green Party, kind of the three main progressive political parties in the House of Commons and in various provincial legislatures as well. But I do think that recently we're kind of starting to see this trend. I mean, you saw it even in the United States recently in the presidential election, where of course Donald Trump was victorious, where young people are making a shift to become more conservative, which is an argument that, conservatives are making themselves, because they're saying, we're against this idea of lowering the voting age, and it might actually benefit us. So they're trying to showcase that, they're taking a principled stance on all of this, whereas other parties like the Green Party and like the NDP and some liberals, the liberals are divided over this issue within their caucus, they've been really trying to make the argument that, again, introducing these habits from a younger age will make them more likely to resonate, to stay with people as they advance forward into some of their older years. And I do think that young people still, regardless of, whether they're 18 or 16, I don't think that's going to change a whole lot with who they vote for necessarily. I just think that it might allow higher voter turnout levels and allow higher amounts of people to actually go out and vote in every election.
Now, you've talked a little bit about the clickbait culture that we have, and by lowering the voting age to 16, is there a worry that political parties might start to use social media more to their advantage and start appeasing more to those 16-year-olds, but also have younger voters start posting more on social media to influence their friends' decision on who they should vote for?
Yeah, and I mean, even taking a step back from the issue of lowering the voting age, I think social media and misinformation is becoming a bigger
Mhm.
and bigger issue, especially in the age of artificial intelligence, where you're seeing a number of different things on your For You pages, whether it be on Instagram or on TikTok or whatever, platform, and people have to question, like, whether it's AI, whether it's real, because it just looks so similar in a lot of instances. And you're seeing a number of different, usages of these types of technologies, both to help certain political candidates, but also to harm them as well. Again, in the presidential election, there was an instance where a super PAC came out with an artificial intelligence generated advertisement that was going against a certain candidate. And people actually at first
Mhm.
took it as if it was fact and if it was real, because they thought, oh, if it's coming from someone who, generally speaking, again, stereotypically could be thought of as credible, then, we can trust it. But again, these are examples of instances where people who have kind of the backing of, again, being a credible, kind of consistent voice in the political landscape, actually too are kind of abusing some of the trust that they have by embracing social media too much and by embracing artificial intelligence too much. And so, relating that back to the issue of the voting age, I think young people, one of the strongest arguments in favor of not lowering the voting age is that young people are a lot more vulnerable to this type of information. They're more likely to fall into certain trends and bad
Mhm.
habits, for sure. As a young person myself, even going to school, seeing young people and my peers who are oftentimes able to kind of get acquainted to different trends that they see on social media because they think that it might be, kind of trendy or cool
Mhm.
to do, which, is fine in some cases when it's not harmful. But even if you look to instances where the kind of outcome or things that people are advocating for, even as simple as, someone supporting a political candidate, that can be thought of as a good thing. Obviously, I mean, you're civically engaged, you're participating in democracy. But if you're supporting a candidate and you're going to an extreme to support that candidate, but you don't have any backing, you don't have any information as to why you support that candidate, as to what that candidate is going to do, that's not going to, lead to a healthier state of our democracy. I think it's going to harm it in a number of ways as well. And that's certainly a big concern that many people have.
Well, and on this decision, what lessons can Canada take from other countries or municipalities that have already lowered the voting age?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. If you look to Australia, for example,
Mhm.
they've looked to implement various, measures of this nature as well. It's actually hard to pick out different countries where it has worked successfully in the way that it, was intended. And again, that's an argument where people who are against lowering the voting age have been using that in favor of themselves, right? Like, they're saying it hasn't been done successfully in very many places before. Why would it be successful in Canada? But I think the main argument is just that a lot of the places who have tried to do this or who have already done it just don't have, as advanced of democracies as Canada does. I think sometimes it's oftentimes easy to lose sight of the fact that Canada's a Western liberal
Mhm.
democracy. We have the backing of, taxpayer dollars that can help fund, various elements, Elections Canada, Elections Ontario, and the various kind of organizations across the country that help to ensure that not only people can go out and vote, but that people can help make an informed decision. And I think that's especially relevant with young people. Even in the most recent election, I remember talking with people from TikTok, from Instagram, and different platforms, going back to the kind of vulnerability and misinformation piece, where they would actually label something that was content specifically that was intended to
Mhm.
try and persuade people one way or the other with respect to the election. And so I think that's a valid point as well, because I think it's easy sometimes for people to draw criticisms, but a lot of these companies who are involved and who are stakeholders in this type of process are actually working themselves as well to make kind of adequate adjustments to ensure that we're able to carry a certain level of importance on the information that is being released.
And we do have about a minute left, but a big argument for lowering the voting age is to have younger Canadians more involved in what's going on in politics. How big of a role do you think that will play in lowering the voting age and influence on voter turnout?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think young people can get involved already, even though the voting age isn't at 16.
Mhm.
I think it definitely gives them kind of a new level of incentive to get out and vote when they know that they're actually going to be civically engaged for a purpose. But that doesn't mean, I mean, young people can go out right now, they can still door knock, they can still do many things that oftentimes can actually contribute to the political process and the dialogue in Canada, even greater than going out and voting might. I mean, there's various organizations people can join. A number of the political parties have official youth wings. So you have the Young Liberals of Canada, you have the Young Conservatives, you
Mhm.
have nonpartisan organizations as well. There's one called the Young Politicians of Canada. I mean, there's a whole host of different
Wyatt,
organizations for people.
I
Go
do
for
have to cut
it.
you off. We have run out of time, but thank you so much. Stay
Thank
with
you.
us. Forum Daily will be right back.